This week in the Middle East, it did not look like a week of ceasefire. It looked like a week in which all sides are standing before the same question. Are we moments before an agreement that will dismantle the Iranian threat, or moments before the next strike against Tehran? In Iran, the Revolutionary Guards are trying to show the world that they are still standing. They are threatening American ships, setting conditions for negotiations, striking and talking about taking control over the Strait of Hormuz and presenting the very survival of the regime as a victory. But behind these declarations stands a different reality. A maritime blockade that is choking oil exports, hundreds of ships trapped in the Gulf area, internal economic pressure, hard questions around the nuclear program, and secondary fronts in Lebanon, Gaza, Yemen, Iraq, and the Gulf that are turning this war into one large regional struggle. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is Boots on the Ground, a report of the war of Israel and the United States and their allies against Iran, the Revolutionary Guards, and all the arms of the axis of evil in the Middle East. We are here to bring you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel and also the whole truth about what's happening in our neighborhood, the Middle East. And before we begin, just take a moment to click on the subscribe button. Share this report with friends, with family, and continue helping us spread the truth in real time. The central story of this week is Iran. Not only Iran as a country, but Iran as an entire system. Nuclear, missiles, oil, ships, proxies, money, a regime that suppresses its citizens, and a military apparatus that is trying to survive long enough to declare that it has won. In Washington, they understand that the talks with Tehran have reached a dangerous point. On one hand, President Trump is still leaving the door open to an agreement. On the other hand, he's making clear that if Iran does not make real concessions, the strikes will return, and with greater force. Inside the administration, they are already talking about the possibility of turning Operation Epic Fury into Operation Heavy Hammer, not only as a change of name, but as a sign that the next phase could be broader, heavier, and more focused. The American demands are clear: removing the enriched materials from Iran, stopping the enrichment for a long period, dismantling or neutralizing the central facilities like Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan, banning underground nuclear activity, allowing real surprise inspections, and dealing not only with the ballistic missiles, but also with the money that reaches Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, and the militias in Iraq. On the other side, Iran is trying to reverse the order of things. First, remove the sanctions. First, release the frozen funds. First, open oil routes. First, receive recognition of its status in the Strait of Hormuz, and only afterwards, maybe speak seriously about uranium, about enrichment facilities, about missiles and proxies. From the perspective of Israel and the United States, this is not a technical mistake. It is a strategic trap. Because if Iran first receives economic and maritime oxygen, it receives time. Time to move materials, time to repair the infrastructure, time to take launchers out of the underground warehouses, time to calm the Iranian street, time to open the smuggling routes through Turkey, through the Caspian Sea, and through illegal money networks. And above all, time to sell the world a picture of the end of the war, while the threat itself remains alive. This week, it became clear again just how much the Strait of Hormuz is the heart of the story. Since mid-April, the American maritime blockade on Iran's ports has become a central pressure tool. Iran can produce oil, but it is struggling to export it. The oil is accumulating in land-based tanks, in oil tankers, and in export terminals like Karag Island, which for years was a central gateway for the Iranian oil to the world. And this week, it was reported that tanker movement from Karag has nearly stopped, and that around the island, there were signs of oil leaks. If Iran has nowhere to store the oil that it produced, and may be forced to reduce production and even shut down the wells. A setup that is not like closing just a light in your house. In an oil well, pressure, infrastructure, and piping are a complex system, and damage to it can cost billions and require a long time to repair. And at the same time, hundreds of ships are struck in the Gulf area. Thousands of sailors have already been inside a war zone for weeks, with reports speaking of shortages of food, water, medicine, and fuel. Iran understands that the war is not only against the American Navy, it is against the insurance companies, the ports, the energy markets, food prices, maritime, transport, and economies very far from the Middle East. One drone, one hit on a commercial ship, or one threat against the underwater communication cables is enough to make the world ask whether passage through Hormuz is still safe. That is exactly the Iranian pressure point. This week, we also saw the military side of that pressure. American ships, including destroyers, were threatened by the Iranian actions that included missiles, drones, and fast boats of the Revolutionary Guards. The Americans intercepted them, and afterwards struck the Revolutionary Guards infrastructure in southern Iran. Launch sites, command and control centers, intelligence systems, naval facilities, and areas around the Bandar Abbas and the Qasem Island. Washington is still trying to present this as a measured response, not as a full return to war. But everyone understands, if next time an American ship is hit or the American soldiers are killed, patience in Washington will look very different. And this is where China enters. Trump arrived in Beijing for a meeting with Xi Jinping in a summit that outwardly looks like a diplomatic ceremony with a red carpet, an orchestra, and pleasant words about partnership between the two superpowers. But behind the compliance and the compliments stands one especially heavy issue: Iran. China buys oil from Iran, depends on the flow of the energy from the Gulf, and does not want the Strait of Hormuz to remain closed for a very long time. Trump does not need China in order to defeat Iran militarily, but he can use China to shorten the path to an agreement if Beijing pressures Tehran to open Hormuz and climb down from the tree. It is possible that the blockade will continue without a broad war. If China chooses to protect Iran behind the scenes, the military option will return to the center. And meanwhile, inside Iran itself, the regime is showing confidence but broadcasting fear. The reports this week speak about a currency that is eroding, food prices that have jumped sharply, businesses closing, workers losing their livelihoods, and the bringing in of militias from Iraq and Afghanistan into Tehran to help with the internal repression. This is a very important detail. For years, Iran sent militias outward to Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and the Gaza Strip, not far from here. Now, some of those arms are coming back inside to protect the regime from the Iranian people themselves. A calm regime does not need roadblocks of foreign armed men who doesn't even speak the Persian language in the streets of its capital. A regime that is confident of itself does not need to execute citizens in order to prove control. The question of who is truly making decisions in Tehran became critical this week. There are reports about the condition of Mujtaba Khamenei, about his isolation, about serious injuries, and about the possibility that the Revolutionary Guard are using his name to run the hardline policy. At the same time, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian is trying to project diplomatic responsibility, but the Revolutionary Guard and the extremist camp are pushing against any compromise that would look like a surrender. Therefore, Trump is not negotiating with one orderly system. He's standing before a president, Revolutionary Guards, an extremist ideology camp, a supreme leader who is wounded or isolated, and a security apparatus that understands that every first concession can lead to the next demand. First, uranium, then missiles, then proxies, and in the end, the regime itself. In the Lebanese arena, Israel is sending a clear message. Even if there are talks about an agreement with Iran, Hezbollah has no immunity. This week, during the sensitive timing of diplomatic contacts, the IDF struck in the Dahia in Beirut and eliminated a commander in the Radwan forces, the elite unit that Hezbollah built for years in order to threaten the Galilee, the northern communities of Israel. This strike is not only the elimination of one man, it is a message to the entire system. A ceasefire is not shelter. If Hezbollah uses the time to rebuild its infrastructure, weapons, warehouses, launchers, tunnels, and anti-tank cells, Israel will act. In southern Lebanon, the IDF continues to strike infrastructure with reports of military buildings, weapons depots, launchers, and underground infrastructure, including infrastructure found beneath a children's clothing store. This is Hezbollah's method: civilian above ground, terror below ground. Lebanon is also beginning to show cracks in the relation to Iran. And this week, there was a report about an unprecedented Lebanese complaint at the Security Council against Iran and against Hezbollah, claiming that Tehran is harming the Lebanese sovereignty and dragging the country into a war that it did not choose. At the same time, representatives of Israel and Lebanon are supposed to continue talks in Washington. But the gap is clear. Lebanon wants quiet. Israel wants security. And quiet without the dismantling of Hezbollah is not security. It is only a pause before the next round. In Gaza, the picture is similar. Hamas informed the Americans that it will not disarm. From Israel's perspective, this is not an assessment, but an answer. While the world is looking at Iran and Hormuz, Hamas is trying to rebuild itself. There are reports of smuggling by air, sea, and land, of the exploitation of the humanitarian aid, of control on the ground, of money being distributed to operatives, and of the prevention of any alternative governing body. The elimination of Azam el-Haya, the son of senior Hamas figure Khalil el-Haya, fits into this picture. According to the reports, he was not the central target of the strike, but he was part of the communication system between the political leadership and the military wing. In a terror organization such a liaison is not only a messenger, he's a nerve channel. In Bet Hanun, Israel is showing the opposite path, clearing territory, destroying infrastructure above and below the ground, removing a direct threat from the communities near the Gaza border, and restoring the security, not through declarations, but through engineering, through intelligence and military work, meter by meter. It is great work, but it's exactly the work that restores security, because a tunnel does not disappear because of a document. A launcher does not disappear because of a media statement. And a terrorist organization does not disarm because someone in the West wants to believe it is happening. The Houthis, the militias in Iraq, and additional arenas are part of the same system. Iran does not operate only through Tehran. It operates through the Red Sea, through Bab el-Mandeb, through Lebanon, through Gaza, through Iraq, through Syria, and through smuggling routes in the north. This week, the issue of the Caspian Sea came up again, as it has become a northern oxygen pipeline for Iran. While everyone is looking at Hormuz, Tehran and Russia can use this route to move food, equipment, and perhaps also components for drones. Therefore, Israeli strikes against the naval capabilities in northern Iran take on broader meanings. If Iran bypasses the blockade in the south through the Caspian Sea in the north, the pressure on Hormuz weakens. We invite you to take part in something real, something rooted in the land and in our heart. The Rebuild Israel campaign continues, bringing life back to Israel's north. Along Israel's northern border, an area marked by war, displacement, and loss, we are planting an apple orchard, not as a symbol for a single moment, but as part of a long-term commitment to rebuild what was damaged. This orchard is more than just agriculture. It creates jobs for local families. It helps communities return and rebuild. And it sends a clear message to the people of Israel: you are not alone. When you donate, You're not just giving, you're rebuilding. Your support puts trees in the ground, restores livelihoods, and transforms a land scarred by war into a land that grows again. This is how renewal takes root. This is how Israel rebuilds after war. Join us in restoring the North and strengthening the future of the land of Israel. Go now to tbn.org/rebuildisrael or call 800-804-7895. Again, that's tbn.org/rebuildisrael or call 800-804-7895. Rebuild the land, restore hope, bless the future. Now let's get back to the news. The question of the week is not only when there will be an attack on Iran. The question is what the attack will look like if it comes, and what it is supposed to achieve. If Trump chooses a military move, he probably will not return to exactly the same pattern of previous strikes. The targets that came up this week include energy infrastructure, continued pressure on the Karaj and on Hormuz, strikes on centers of power for the Revolutionary Guards, the thwarting of extremist leadership, and the continuation of a maritime and economic blockade that will force Tehran back to the table from a weaker position. In other words, the goal is not only to punish Iran. The goal is to change the survival calculation of the regime. But Israel must measure every agreement and every strike by the same test: what the enemy actually loses. Does the enriched uranium leave Iran? Does enrichment stop? Are the nuclear facilities dismantled or only frozen? Are the ballistic missiles included? Does the money not return to Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis? Is Israel's freedom of action in Lebanon and Gaza preserved? If the answers are not clear, then such an agreement could become a lifeline for the Ayatollahs, not the end of the threat. And this is a great lesson after October 7th. You do not measure a threat by the quiet that it makes today. You measure it by the capability it is building for tomorrow. Hamas can be quiet and build tunnels. Hezbollah can talk about a ceasefire and rebuild the Radwan commando forces. Iran can talk about negotiations and keep uranium, missiles, and proxies. Therefore, Israel cannot allow itself to confuse media quiet with real security. So, is the next attack against Iran coming? According to this week's picture, the answer is that it is closer than it was a few days ago. But the timing depends on three things: what Trump returns with from China, whether Iran continues to set impossible conditions, and whether there will be another maritime or military event that forces Washington to respond with force. Iran is puffing out its chest because it thinks survival is victory. But the blockade continues. The oil is stuck. Hezbollah is being worn down. Hamas refuses to disarm. And the world is beginning to understand that the Iranian threat is not only an Israeli problem. It is a problem of ports, fuel, food, ships, markets, borders, and the lives of millions of people. So continue spreading the truth. Follow us, share this, subscribe to TBN Israel on YouTube, and keep telling what's happening in this region. You can also look for us on our social media platform. I'm Yair Pinto. With me is Mati Shoshani. Check us out to get the behind-the-scene look of what it's like to live in Israel during this war. And I call on all of you to unite in prayer. When you pray, pray for the people behind the headlines. Pray for those that are affected by this terrible regime. Pray for the men and women that are defending us. Pray for the children that are still under rocket attacks because of Hezbollah in the north. Keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem and for God's will to be done. And pray for the Iranian people.